Sarah stood beside the empty chair, her hand trembling against its gilded back. 300 guests filled the crystal ballroom, their conversations a symphony of champagne glasses and practiced laughter. But at table 7, silence had fallen like a guillotine. Her husband Kenneth sat rigid in his navy tuxedo, his jaw set in that familiar expression of irritation she'd learned to dread. Beside him, his mother Victoria smiled, that particular smile Sarah had seen 1,000 times, the one that said you are nothing. And there, her hand possessively draped over Kenneth's shoulder, was Diane, younger and glittering in red, her eyes dancing with cruel amusement. "Kenneth," Sarah's voice barely rose above a whisper, "there's an empty seat. This table," he cut her off, his words sharp as broken glass, "is for my family and business associates." He didn't even look at her. "You can find somewhere else to sit." Victoria leaned forward, pearls clicking against her wine glass. "Perhaps the staff can find you a corner seat, dear. This is a professional event, after all. Surely you understand." Diane's laugh was soft, intimate, meant only for Kenneth. He smiled back at her. That smile Sarah remembered from their wedding day, now gifted to another woman. Around them, other guests had stopped pretending not to notice. Some whispered behind their hands. Others looked away, embarrassed to witness a wife's public humiliation. Sarah's heart cracked open. Right there in her champagne-colored dress, beneath the crystal chandeliers of the ballroom she owned, the building her late father had built, the gala her company was hosting, the charity event bearing her family name that Kenneth had begged her to get him tickets for, never once asking why she had that power. "I see," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her chest. "I understand now." She turned toward the stage, her heels clicking against marble floors her inheritance had paid for, while behind her, Kenneth raised his glass in a toast. "To people knowing their place," Victoria declared, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Their laughter followed her all the way to the microphone. "Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake." Now let us continue. 6 months earlier, Sarah had believed her marriage was merely going through a difficult season. The kind every couple faces, the kind that required patience and prayer and quiet endurance. She stood in the kitchen of their Lecky home, preparing Kenneth's favorite pepper soup, when her phone buzzed with a bank notification. Another automatic transfer. The mortgage paid from her account. The car note for Kenneth's Range Rover paid from her account. The monthly allowance to Victoria paid from her account. Sarah set down her wooden spoon and opened her banking app. In 4 years of marriage, she'd paid for almost everything, quietly without mention, believing that's what love looked like. Supporting your husband, keeping the peace. Kenneth earned well as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. Nearly 8 million naira annually, impressive by most standards. But Sarah's inheritance from her father, the late Jonathan Dalton, commercial real estate magnate, generated more than that in a single month. The Dalton Towers Holdings empire owned 17 properties across Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. Shopping centers, office complexes, the very building where Kenneth's company leased space. Her father's final advice still echoed in her memory. "Keep it quiet, my daughter. Let your wealth be private. Let your husband be a man. The world is cruel to women with power." So she'd hidden behind the corporate veil of Dalton Towers Holdings, introducing herself as Sarah Williams, doing charity work, and family business consulting. Kenneth knew she had some inheritance, enough that she didn't need to work, but he'd never asked for details. Never been curious about the source of their comfortable life. "Sarah." Kenneth's voice cut through her thoughts as he entered the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "I need to take this call outside." He didn't wait for her response, already walking toward the garden, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. Sarah stirred the soup, watching through the window as her husband laughed at something the caller said. his head thrown back, relaxed in a way he hadn't been with her in months. That evening, Victoria arrived unannounced, as she often did, her driver carrying bags of groceries she expected Sarah to cook. Still no baby? Victoria settled into the living room sofa like a queen assuming her throne. 4 years, Sarah. 4 years of marriage and my son has no heir. People are beginning to talk. We've been trying, Mama. Sarah forced her voice to remain respectful. These things take time. Time. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Or perhaps God is sending a message. Perhaps Kenneth needs a woman who can actually fulfill her wifely duties. A woman who knows her purpose. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. She'd undergone every fertility test available. The doctors found nothing wrong. Kenneth had refused to be tested, insisting there's nothing wrong with me. It's obviously you. I've been praying, Mama. We both have. Prayer without action is useless. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. My son deserves better than a barren wife who contributes nothing to this family. If I were you, I'd be grateful he hasn't already replaced you. The words hit like physical blows, but Sarah kept her face carefully neutral. The mask she'd perfected over 4 years of marriage. After Victoria left, Sarah found herself standing in Kenneth's study, drawn by an instinct she didn't want to name. His phone lay on the desk, still unlocked from his last call. She shouldn't look. Trust was sacred. But her hand moved anyway, opening his messages. The name at the top of his recent contacts was saved simply as D. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear that dress I like. Kenneth's response. Anything for you, beautiful. You know you're all I think about. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank into Kenneth's leather chair, the one she'd bought him for his last birthday, and stared at words that rewrote her entire marriage. The next message was a photo. A woman in a hotel robe, her smile intimate and knowing. Sarah's phone slipped from her hands, clattering against the hardwood floor her father's money had installed. Outside, Kenneth's car pulled into the driveway. She heard his key in the lock, his footsteps in the hallway. Sarah? Is dinner ready? She looked up at the man she'd loved for 7 years, married for 4, and realized she was staring at a stranger who wore her husband's face. Who is D? The question escaped before she could stop it. Kenneth froze in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation to anger in seconds. Were you going through my phone? His voice was ice. What kind of wife violates her husband's privacy like that? The argument that followed became the template for all their fights afterward. Kenneth's offense at being questioned, his ability to transform her hurt into her fault, the way he could make her apologize for discovering his betrayal. You're paranoid, he'd said, standing over her with righteous indignation. D is Davis, my colleague. You know we use nicknames at work. This is exactly why our marriage is struggling. Your insecurity, your constant suspicion. How can I be a husband to a woman who doesn't trust me? Sarah had wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. So she'd apologized, let him comfort her. Convinced herself she'd overreacted. 2 weeks later, Victoria hosted a family gathering at her Okoye mansion. Kenneth's siblings came. His brother Marcus with his wife Jennifer, his sisters Grace and Patience with their families. 20 people crowded into Victoria's dining room, children running through the garden, the air thick with jollof rice and accusations. Sarah has accused Kenneth of infidelity, Victoria announced midway through the meal, her voice carrying over all conversation. Apparently, she's been spying on his phone, invading his privacy, making wild accusations based on innocent work messages. Every head turned toward Sarah. The room's temperature seemed to drop. That's not, Sarah began, but Victoria cut her off. My son works hard to provide for a wife who gives him nothing in return. No children. No peace. Just suspicion and drama. Victoria's eyes swept the table. Tell me, is this how we raised our daughters? To disrespect their husbands? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer looked at her plate. No one spoke in Sarah's defense. Kenneth reached across the table to squeeze his mother's hand. It's all right, Mama. Sarah has apologized. We're working through it. The pity in his voice was worse than Victoria's anger. 3 months before the gala, Kenneth began bringing Diane to family events. Sarah first met her at Sunday lunch at Victoria's house. She arrived late, wind-blown and apologetic, and Kenneth jumped up to greet her like she was royalty. "This is Diane, our new marketing director," he said, his hand lingering on her back a moment too long. "She's brilliant. Turned around our entire Legos division in 6 months." Diane was beautiful in an effortless way. Natural hair in perfect coils, minimal makeup, designer clothes that looked casual but cost more than most people's monthly salary. She smiled at Sarah with practiced warmth. "You must be Sarah. Kenneth talks about you constantly." The lie was so smooth Sarah almost believed it. Diane began appearing everywhere. Family dinners, church services. The cinema trip Kenneth claimed was just colleagues unwinding. Always with Victoria's enthusiastic approval. "Finally, a woman of substance," Victoria said one afternoon, loud enough for Sarah to hear from the kitchen. "Education, ambition, beauty. And I hear she comes from the Okoro family. Excellent connections." Sarah scrubbed dishes that didn't need scrubbing, her hands raw in scalding water. When the invitation arrived for the annual Dalton Towers Holdings charity gala, Kenneth brought it to Sarah with barely contained excitement. "This is huge," he said, studying the embossed invitation. "The who's who of Legos business will be there. I need to make connections, especially with the restructuring happening at work." He looked up at her. "Can you use your charity connections to get me tickets? I know you do work with some organizations." Sarah stared at her husband holding an invitation to an event her company was hosting. To a gala in a ballroom her father had built, under a chandelier she'd personally selected. "How many tickets do you need?" she asked quietly. "4. Me, Mama Diane, she needs to network too, and Marcus if he's available. And me." Kenneth's pause was infinitesimal, but Sarah caught it. "Well, it's more of a professional event, Sarah. You might be bored. All business talk, you know how these things are." "I see. But if you really want to come, I suppose we could arrange something. Maybe you could sit with the charity volunteers." Sarah felt something inside her chest turn to stone. Cold, hard, permanent. "Let me make some calls," she said. "I'll get you VIP tickets." Kenneth kissed her forehead absently, already texting someone. Probably Diane, about the exciting news. Sarah walked to her home office, the room Kenneth never entered, assuming it was where she did her charity paperwork, and called her executive assistant. "Grace, it's me. The gala seating arrangements. Add Kenneth Williams to the VIP family table. Include 3 additional seats under his name. Victoria Williams, Diane Okoro, and Marcus Williams." "That's your husband's table?" Grace sounded confused. "Where will you be sitting, ma'am?" Sarah looked out the window at the Lagos skyline, at the city her father had taught her to navigate, at the empire she'd inherited and grown in silence. "I'll be on stage," she said. "I'll be exactly where I've always been, just finally visible." The night before the gala, Kenneth came home with a new tuxedo and instructions. "I need you to look presentable tomorrow, Sarah, just in case anyone asks who you are. Wear something simple, nothing flashy. I don't want you drawing attention away from the important conversations I'll be having." Sarah nodded, already knowing she'd wear her father's emerald necklace, the one Kenneth had never bothered to ask about, never realized was worth more than his annual salary. "Of course," she said. "I wouldn't dream of overshadowing you." The crystal ballroom of Dalton Towers' flagship property shimmered like something out of a dream. 300 guests an evening were mingled beneath chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across white linen tables. The charity gala was Sarah's masterpiece, years of planning, millions in donations secured, all to benefit the Lagos Children's Hospital expansion. Sarah arrived alone, wearing a champagne-colored gown that her stylist had selected, her father's emerald necklace at her throat. Her assistant Grace met her at the private entrance. "Everything is ready, ma'am. Your speech is at the podium. Security is briefed. The program coordinator has your cue." Grace hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah touched the emerald at her neck, remembering her father's hands placing it there on her wedding day. "Protect yourself, my daughter," he'd whispered. "Love makes us vulnerable, but wisdom makes us strong." "I'm sure," Sarah said. She entered through the main doors like any other guest, watching the room she designed come to life. Kenneth arrived 20 minutes later, Victoria on one arm, Diane on the other, his brother Marcus trailing awkwardly behind. They looked perfect together. Kenneth in his new tuxedo, Victoria resplendent in gold, Diane stunning in red. The picture of success, of belonging, of a man with his real family. Sarah waited until they were seated at table 7, prime location, center of the room, the VIP positioning Kenneth had been so excited about. She watched him order wine, laugh at Diane's jokes, kiss his mother's cheek. Playing the role of devoted son, attentive lover, successful man. Then she walked toward their table. Kenneth saw her first. His expression flickered, surprise, then irritation, then something harder. Embarrassment, perhaps, that his simple wife had followed him to his important event. Sarah. Her name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. What are you doing here? Hello, Kenneth. Mama. Diane. Sarah kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I thought I might join you. She reached for the empty fourth chair, the seat beside Marcus, who looked uncomfortable enough to disappear. This table is for my family and business associates. Kenneth's words were clipped, controlled, aware of watching eyes. You can find somewhere else to sit. Sarah's hand froze on the chair back. Around them, conversations were dying, attention shifting toward table 7. Victoria leaned forward, her smile sharp as glass. Perhaps the staff can find you a corner seat, dear. This is a professional event, after all. Surely you understand. Diane said nothing, but her hand slid possessively over Kenneth's, her expression radiating triumph. Sarah stood there, trembling, as the full weight of her humiliation settled over her shoulders. This was her building, her gala, her charity, her name embossed on every invitation. And her husband had just denied her a seat at the table. The emerald necklace suddenly felt heavy, a weight of inheritance and expectation, and her father's whispered warnings. I see, Sarah said quietly. I understand now. She turned and walked toward the stage, her heels clicking against marble. Behind her, Victoria's voice carried clearly. To people knowing their place. Their laughter. Kenneth's deep and satisfied, Victoria's sharp and cruel, Diane's soft and intimate, followed her across the ballroom. Sarah climbed the stage steps, her hands steady now. The MC was checking his notes, ready to begin the program. She touched his arm, whispered a change to the schedule. His eyes widened. Are you certain, Mrs. Williams? Absolutely. The lights dimmed. The MC approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Before we begin our program this evening, I'd like to invite a very special guest to say a few words. She needs no introduction to those of us who work in Lagos commercial real estate, but for our other distinguished guests, please welcome the founder and CEO of Dalton Towers Holdings, tonight's host and the driving force behind this charity initiative, Mrs. Sarah Dalton Williams. The applause was immediate, thunderous. Heads turned toward the stage. At table 7, Kenneth's wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering against his plate. The red wine spread across the white linen like blood. Victoria's face went gray. Diane's hand slipped from Kenneth's arm. Sarah stepped up to the microphone, looking out at 300 faces, seeing only the 3 at table 7, the husband who'd betrayed her, the mother-in-law who'd belittled her, the mistress who'd stolen her place. Good evening, she said, her voice carrying through the ballroom, clear and strong and finally her own. Thank you all for being here tonight. The room settled into expectant silence. Sarah smiled, a real smile this time, not the polite mask she'd worn for 4 years. Tonight is about more than charity, though that cause remains close to my heart. Tonight, I learned something profound about family, loyalty, and worth. About what happens when you love someone who cannot see you. About the price of silence and the cost of dignity. Kenneth half stood, his face stricken. Victoria grabbed his arm, yanking him back down. Sarah continued, her words precise as surgery. This building you're sitting in, the gala you're attending, the charity you're supporting, these are built on my father's legacy. Jonathan Dalton taught me that real wealth isn't just money. It's integrity. It's knowing your value. It's refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's limited vision. She paused, her eyes finding Kenneth's across the crowded room. Tonight, my husband told me to find a corner seat at this event. He said this table, this space, this moment was for his family and business associates, not for his wife. Her voice didn't waver. What he didn't know is that every seat in this room, every table, every chandelier, every breath of air belongs to me. is paid for by me, exists because my father built an empire and trusted me to expand it. The whispers started then, rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. For 4 years, I've hidden my success to make a man comfortable. I've paid every bill, funded every luxury, supported every dream, while being called barren, useless, ungrateful, while being replaced by his mistress with his mother's blessing, while being told I contributed nothing to my own marriage. Sarah's voice rose, not in anger but in power reclaimed. This morning I filed for divorce. I've removed Kenneth Williams from every account he never knew was mine. Every property he thought we owned together, they're all mine. Every investment, every asset, every dollar he assumed he earned the right to mine. Kenneth was standing now, pushing back from the table. Diane had gone pale. Victoria looked like she might faint. And to Diane Okoro, Sarah's gaze found the woman in red. Congratulations. You've won a man with nothing but debt and delusion. I hope he treats you better than he treated the woman who built his entire life. The room erupted. Phones appeared, recording, photographing. Guests stood, craning for better views. The MC looked torn between stopping this and recognizing he was witnessing history. Kenneth fought through the crowd toward the stage, but security intercepted him, Sarah's security, following her instructions. Victoria screamed from her seat. She's lying. She's bitter and vindictive and lying. Borrowing. But Sarah's assistant was already projecting documents onto the screens throughout the ballroom. Property deeds, corporate filings, bank statements. Every piece of evidence needed to prove what Kenneth had been too proud to notice. His wife wasn't just wealthy, she was a titan. And he treated her like she was worthless. Sarah descended from the stage, walking past Kenneth without a glance, past Victoria's collapse into tears, past Diane's desperate attempt to distance herself from the disaster. She walked through the ballroom she owned, past tables full of Lagos elite who would tell this story for years, past the charity banners bearing her father's name, past the life she'd built in silence. At the door, Marcus stopped her, his eyes red. Sarah, I'm sorry. We all knew. We all saw what was happening and we said nothing. I'm so sorry. Sarah touched his arm gently. Then don't be sorry. Be better. She stepped into the Lagos night, leaving behind the ruins of a marriage that had died long before she found the courage to bury it. Behind her, security was escorting Kenneth, Victoria, and Diane out through the service exit, while 300 guests documented the fall of a man who'd forgotten the first rule of power. Never humiliate someone who's thrown your. The video went viral within hours. Sarah sat in her father's study, now her study, in her family's Banana Island estate, watching her phone light up with notifications. News sites, blogs, social media. By morning, #SeatDenied was trending across Nigeria, with people debating, analyzing, celebrating, and condemning in equal measure. Her lawyer called at 7 a.m. Mrs. Williams, the story is everywhere. My office has been fielding calls since midnight. Journalists, television producers, even a film company asking about rights to your story. And Kenneth. His lawyers made contact an hour ago. They're asking for a meeting. Sarah set down her coffee, watching the sunrise paint gold across her father's photograph on the wall. Tell them no. Every communication goes through you. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. He signed away rights to any assets I brought into the marriage or acquired during it. He gets nothing. Mrs. Williams, I should warn you. He may try to contact you directly. He's already been to the house 3 times this morning. Security turned him away, but let him come, Sarah said quietly. Let him stand outside the gates of what he thought was his. Let him understand what he lost. By afternoon, the consequences were cascading. Kenneth's office called. Not him, but his director, formally requesting his resignation. The pharmaceutical company couldn't afford the association with a man who'd publicly humiliated his wealthy wife and gotten caught in an affair with a subordinate. Diane received the same call an hour later. Victoria's world collapsed even faster. Kenneth's sisters Grace and Patience arrived at her Ikoyi mansion with their families, their voices carrying through the windows. You knew, Grace said, her voice sharp with betrayal. You knew he was cheating and you encouraged it. You called Sarah barren, useless, worthless, while she was paying for everything, including your monthly allowance. Sarah was the problem. Victoria's voice was shrill, defensive. She couldn't give us grandchildren. Kenneth deserved better. Kenneth deserved nothing, Patience snapped. And neither do you. You raised a man who thought he could humiliate his wife at an event she was hosting. Do you understand how this makes our entire family look? Marcus arrived that evening with a bottle of wine and an apology that couldn't undo years of silence. I knew it was wrong, he told Sarah, sitting across from her in the study where she discovered Kenneth's betrayal. At every family gathering, every time Mama criticized you, every time Kenneth dismissed you, I knew. Jennifer knew. We all knew. And we said nothing because it was easier to let you suffer than to challenge him. Why are you here, Marcus? To apologize. And to ask, not for Kenneth, he's beyond help, but for the rest of us. We're severing ties with him and Mama. Grace and Patience are doing the same. We want you to know that not all of us are like them. Sarah studied her brother-in-law, seeing genuine remorse in his face. Your family's approval means nothing to me anymore, Marcus. But your honesty does. Thank you for that, at least. A week after the gala, Kenneth appeared at Dalton Tower's corporate office. Security called Sarah immediately. Mrs. Williams, your ex-husband is in the lobby. He's asking to see you. Should we escort him out? Sarah looked at her calendar, meetings scheduled back-to-back. A conference call with investors in 30 minutes. A site inspection at the Newport Harcourt property in the afternoon. Her life full and purposeful without him. Let him come up, she said. But stay close. Kenneth looked diminished when he entered her office. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight loss, the shadows under his eyes, the desperation replacing his usual confidence. Sarah. He stopped in the doorway as if he didn't recognize the woman behind the mahogany desk, surrounded by architectural plans and financial reports. You look different. I look like myself, she said. Sit down, Kenneth. You have 5 minutes. He collapsed into the chair across from her, the same chair where oil executives and government ministers sat to negotiate deals worth billions. I made a mistake, he began. A terrible mistake. I was blinded by Mama's pressure about children, by Diane's attention, by my own stupid pride. But Sarah, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, rebuild what we had. We had nothing, Sarah interrupted, her voice calm. I had money, property, security, and love. You had lies, entitlement, and contempt. That's not a marriage worth rebuilding. Everything I own is gone, Kenneth's voice cracked. My job, my reputation, my family. Diane won't return my calls. Mama's house is being foreclosed. Apparently you've been paying her mortgage too. I have nothing, Sarah. Nothing. Now you know how you made me feel every single day. Kenneth's face crumpled. I'm begging you. Not for money, not for another chance at marriage, but just don't destroy me completely. Use your influence to stop the media attacks. Tell people we ended amicably. Give me some chance to rebuild my life. Sarah leaned back in her father's chair, her chair, and studied the man she'd once loved enough to hide her light for. Kenneth, I didn't destroy you. I didn't make you cheat. I didn't make you humiliate me in public. I didn't make you deny your wife a seat at a table she built. You did all of that yourself. She paused, letting the words settle. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. So that's it? You just throw me away. You threw yourself away when you thought you could have everything. My money, your mistress, your mother's approval, your pride, without consequences. I'm not punishing you, Kenneth. I'm simply no longer shielding you from the man you chose to be. Security moved closer as Kenneth stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. You're cruel, he said, his voice hollow. I never knew you could be so cruel. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. I'm not cruel. I'm just done being kind to people who mistake kindness for weakness. Kenneth left her office with nothing, which was more than he'd come with. Victoria attempted reconciliation through Jennifer, Marcus's wife, who called Sarah with obvious reluctance. She's asking to see you, Jennifer said. She's not well, Sarah. The stress, the shame, losing contact with her children. It's broken something in her. She wants to apologize. Tell her no, Sarah said gently. Tell her that some apologies come too late, after too much damage. Tell her I hope she finds peace, but she won't find it from me. A month after the gala, Sarah attended the opening ceremony for the new Lagos Children's Hospital wing. The project the gala had fully funded. 300 children would have access to life-saving care because of what she'd built. As she cut the ribbon, surrounded by grateful families and medical staff, she saw Kenneth standing across the street, watching from behind the security barriers. He looked hollowed out, a ghost of the man who'd laughed at her humiliation. Their eyes met across the distance. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his suffering, no triumph in his fall, only a deep, abiding sadness for the marriage they could have had if he'd ever bothered to see her. She turned back to the ceremony, to the children's choir singing, to the future she was building without him. Kenneth disappeared into the Lagos crowds, carrying nothing but regret he'd learned too late was worthless. 3 months after the gala, Sarah stood at her father's grave in Ikoyi Cemetery, a bouquet of white lilies in her hands. "I finally did it, Papa," she whispered to the marble headstone. "I stopped hiding. I stopped protecting men who didn't protect me. I stopped being small." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and hibiscus. Her assistant Grace approached respectfully, waiting at a distance until Sarah acknowledged her. "The shelter is ready, ma'am. The contractors finished this morning. The sign is being installed tomorrow." The Jonathan Dalton Women's Empowerment Center would open next week, a comprehensive facility providing housing, legal services, counseling, and job training for women leaving abusive marriages. Sarah had poured 10 million naira into the project, built on property her father had left her with the note. "Use this to help women be stronger than I taught you to be small." "And the other matter?" Sarah asked. Grace hesitated. Kenneth Williams applied for a sales position at 3 of our tenant companies. All 3 forwarded his applications to us asking for guidance. "Tell them to evaluate him fairly based on his qualifications and work history. Nothing more, nothing less." "You don't want us to." "I don't want revenge, Grace. I want accountability. If he's qualified and can do the work, he deserves the chance to rebuild. But not on my mercy. On his merit." Kenneth had moved back in with Victoria, whose house had indeed been foreclosed after Sarah stopped the mortgage payments she'd been making for 3 years. They now lived in a modest flat in Surulere, the kind of place Kenneth had once dismissed as beneath us. Victoria had suffered a mild stroke 2 weeks after the gala. Grace and Patience paid for her medical care but maintained their distance. The woman who'd measured her worth by her son's success now had to reckon with the son she'd created. Entitled, cruel, and broken. Diane had left Lagos entirely, transferred to her company's Abuja office where the story hadn't followed quite so loudly. But Sarah heard through industry connections that Diane's name was now synonymous with opportunism, her career permanently stained by association with Kenneth's public fall. Marcus and Jennifer visited Sarah monthly, bringing their children, slowly rebuilding something like family. Grace and Patience sent awkward, heartfelt messages apologizing for their years of silence. Sarah accepted their contrition without forgetting what it had cost her. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, in a courtroom where Kenneth sat with a legal aid lawyer, while Sarah's team presented documents that proved every claim she'd made. The judge barely needed an hour to rule. "Mrs. Williams," he'd said, looking at Kenneth with barely disguised contempt, "you owe this woman nothing. The prenuptial agreement is clear. All assets remain with their original owner. Mr. Williams leaves this marriage with exactly what he brought to it." Kenneth had signed the papers with shaking hands, then looked up at Sarah one final time. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "Did you ever actually love me?" Sarah had considered lying, considered mercy, then remembered standing beside that empty chair, trembling with public humiliation while he laughed with his mistress. "Yes," she said. "I loved you more than I loved myself. That was the problem." 6 months after the gala, Sarah attended a foundation gala. Not hers this time, but one hosted by another charity in Lagos's glittering social circuit. She wore emerald green this time, her father's necklace, and the confidence of a woman who'd survived her own resurrection. She was speaking with a potential donor when she saw Kenneth outside the venue, standing behind the velvet ropes with other onlookers hoping to glimpse the wealthy and famous. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not just by weight loss but by the absence of the arrogance that had once defined him. He wore a cheap suit, his shoes scuffed, his face bearing the lines of a man learning consequences. Their eyes met through the glass doors. Kenneth's expression was unreadable, shame perhaps or regret, Or just the blank acceptance of a man who'd learned too late that actions echo forever? Sarah felt her assistant tense beside her, ready to call security. "No," Sarah said quietly. "Let him watch. Let him see what he could have had if he'd ever seen me as human." She turned back to her conversation, to the life she was building, to the empire she was expanding without apology. Kenneth remained outside, pressing against the barrier of a world he'd once taken for granted, now forever beyond his reach. Later that night, Sarah stood on her balcony overlooking Lagos's glittering skyline. The city her father had taught her to navigate, the empire she'd built in silence and was now expanding in her own name. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kenneth's number, sent despite the restraining order her lawyers had advised but she declined. "I understand now. What I lost. What you were. I'm sorry." Sarah read it once, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies arrived too late after too much damage, from people who are only sorry they got caught. She thought about the woman she'd been, small, silent, hiding her light to keep a man comfortable. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, bold, visible, unapologetic. The next morning, Sarah returned to her father's grave with new flowers and news to share. "The shelter opens today, Papa. 20 women and their children are moving in. Women who were told they were nothing, who were beaten down by people who should have lifted them up, who are learning, like I learned, that their worth was never determined by those who couldn't see it." She placed the flowers carefully, her hand steady. "You told me to keep my wealth quiet, to let my husband be a man, to protect myself by staying small. I know you meant well. You were protecting me from a cruel world." Sarah touched the emerald at her throat. "But some lessons we have to unlearn to survive. Some seats at the table we have to claim, even when it means standing alone." The wind rustled her father's favorite prayer. "Make her strong, even if she must be stronger than I taught her to be." Sarah walked back to her car, to her company, to her life, full of purpose and power and the hard-won peace of a woman who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. Behind her, Kenneth's message remained deleted, unread, unanswered. Some people spend their entire lives learning that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. That power borrowed is power that can be reclaimed. That cruelty has a price, and sometimes that price is everything. Kenneth learned too late. Victoria learned too late. Diane learned too late. But Sarah learned just in time. She learned that some seats at the table are not given. They are owned. And some people never realize this until they're standing outside in the rain, watching through the windows of a life they threw away. Kenneth lives with permanent regret, unable to secure employment at his previous level, his reputation destroyed by his own actions. His relationship with his mother is strained by mutual blame. He exists in the shadow of what he lost. A cautionary tale told across Lagos's social circles. Victoria lost her children's respect, and her community's regard. Her health never fully recovered from the stroke, and she spends her days in the modest flat that represents the fall from grace she orchestrated through her cruelty. Diane's career stalled, her name forever associated with opportunism and poor judgment. She rebuilt quietly in Abuja but never reclaimed the trajectory she'd been on before she chose to pursue a married man. Sarah found peace not in revenge but in purpose. She expanded her father's empire, opened the women's shelter, and became a voice for women hiding their strength to protect men's egos. She never remarried, but she never felt alone. Surrounded by the family she chose, the work she loved, and the self-respect she'd reclaimed. The story ends with the truth that actions carry permanent consequences, that cruelty to those we underestimate often reveals our own character, and that sometimes justice is simply allowing people to experience the natural results of their choices, without protection, without mercy, without the shield of those they once hurt. Thank you for staying with us to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal, and tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.